All right, welcome everybody. It is my great honor to welcome Josh Schwede, co-founder and CEO of Spotlife and a Pepperdine alumnus of the year 2004. I also wanted to welcome our students and everyone that's here with us today. Also, big thank you to Diane Single and her team for making these events possible. These are the Executive Leadership Series, and they're very, very important events for our MBA students. So welcome. Josh, it's really great to see you. You look wonderful. You look great. And you look like you're ready for the weekend. So to get us started, can you share a bit about your background? So, for example, what led you to go to business school?
Yeah.
From there, after that, what happened? How did you kind of get your foot started in the business world?
Yeah. I mean, I did undergrad at University of Illinois in the middle of a cornfield. Big Ten school, big sports, right? My first job out of college was at IBM. And the cool thing about that, it was a 6-month training program teaching people about software. This is in the mid to late 90s. And so it was basically college 2.0, but we were getting paid. And I stayed there for 3 years, but that kind of led us into the dot-com era and started getting recruited by a startup. And so at the time, that was all the rage, like going to work for a startup. And so I did that for a couple of years. I loved it. I was hooked from the second I walked in there. And I'm grateful for IBM. It was amazing training and had a couple of great years there. But getting into the entrepreneur environment where you can really see like the results that you're producing based on the level of effort that you're putting in, I was hooked. It was super fun. I never thought I would end up at Pepperdine. But I joined my second startup and they moved me out to Southern California to kind of open up a region out there. And so I was doing that, but I was kind of in my starting to be on the backside of 25 on my way to 30. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. I talked to a couple of friends about business school. So I took the GMAT and applied to a few places, but what attracted me to Pepperdine was the 12-month program. So I had 5 years business experience in a business undergrad. And at the time that was like the requirements. And so for me, it was awesome because I was paying for it by myself. So doing the full 12 months really quick, I looked at it as opportunity cost of being out of the workforce. So, and I think I'm grateful for that because the job I got after Pepperdine was with a company down in Irvine called HireRight. This is in 2004. And it was a background screening firm, which at the time was new. It was a bunch of software people trying to apply technology to a very outdated business process, and was my first foray into HR. And I've been in the HR tech space ever since. And so at HireRight, I at the time it's funny. The recruiter Rose, she called me, and I was in school, and she's like, "I need you. You're a perfect fit for this job. I need you." I said, "I'm literally in school." She's like, "Well, can you quit?" And I'm like, "No, I can't quit." So she stayed on me, and ended up going to work there, and just a great 5-year run. We went public and eventually got acquired, and then which led me to something I'm really proud of, which is a company called HireView. This is in 2009. We were the world's first video digital interviewing company. Like, this is before there were cameras on phones and iPads and stuff, and we were shipping webcams out to candidates and companies to do kind of one-way and two-way interviews. And that company ended up exploding. And I've been to a couple other companies since then, all in the HR tech space in a variety of roles: sales, alliances, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of like product strategy, but mostly I'll go to market. And I since started my own company a little over a year ago called Spotlife. And this is the first time I've started something. I've been super early at companies, but Pepperdine was huge because it taught me a lot of things that I was able to go back to school and apply all I had already learned in the educational environment. And that was awesome. And the job that I got when I came out required MBA. Like, they weren't hiring anybody unless they had an MBA. So yeah, it's a little bit about me. Right now I'm living in the Charlotte area. I spent 6 years in Southern California, moved back to Chicago, where I'm originally from, in 2008. Spent a long time there, but moved down here a couple of years ago, and we're loving it.
Wonderful. So you talked about undergrad, and I always see the trend in recent years that the MBA students are getting younger, and that's been a trend throughout the business school world. At the same time, I think what's missing for them is a little bit of that work experience, because
Mhm.
you mentioned 5 years of work experience gives you a really good overview of how a company operates. And I think you can capitalize on the teachings in a business school a little better. Uh, but, for the benefit of our students, how would you characterize, getting out of undergrad and then working versus getting out of the business school and then working? How is that experience different from your perspective?
Well, I mean, getting out of undergrad, really don't. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, my jobs in high school were like caddying, working at Blockbuster Video. I had like a sales job at Sears, which was great. I started a window washing business. So like when you go into the corporate world for the first time, you don't know what to expect, right? I did an internship my summer before senior year, so that helped a little bit. Um, but then you kind of get in and you're like, all right, I got to network like crazy, et cetera. And you're just a sponge. I think with business school, for me, again, I was paying for my school. I paid a lot of attention in class, which maybe in undergrad I didn't do the most of, but at business school I did. And I think the other thing is when you get into business school, you have the experience that you can draw on. I do remember there were some students that went straight from undergrad to business school, and a couple of the classes were really hard because we'd spend an hour and a half talking about experience and applying it to what was happening. And sometimes that's hard if you don't have that. But yeah, I definitely felt super prepared coming out. But it was also like, I had some wind at my back because I was going into a job that I knew, an MBA was supposedly a requirement. And also I kind of felt like I honed some of those business skills that I learned in undergrad a lot more and knew how to apply them and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah, that's great. Do you have any, looking back, do you have any favorite stories or favorite classes or any memories that stayed with you from your experience at Pepperdine?
Well, I remember my first memory, which was my first day of school. I think we were the first or maybe one of the first classes that started up at the top of the hill in Malibu. And I remember my first class, I was like looking out the window and I could see like Catalina and Santa Monica Pier. And I'm just like, why did I mean, no offense to Illinois, but it's like the cornfields are different than that view. So that was like I'll never forget that moment. That was like, whoa, like kids actually go here for undergrad and this is their idea of college. I think the second thing, I still remember one of my favorite classes. It was with Professor Mark Chun. It was an IT class. I had an IT background. That was one of those classes where it was like all about application. And he also would work in like some case studies, in at the time, which was really cool. So you'd read the case study and we talk about the case study and we would kind of apply what we had learned. He just brought like a ton of enthusiasm too, which I thought was awesome. Super fun to be in that environment, and was grateful for that class. We did a pretty big project at the end of the semester, I think, where we kind of had to team up and start a business idea, brand new idea, and he made it really competitive, which was cool to go do that.
Oh, that's nice. I'll let Mark Chan know. He's still teaching, and I see him every once in a while. We've worked on
Yeah,
projects together.
tell him hi, man.
He's a fun
It was
guy to be
great.
with and to
Yeah,
work with. He's wonderful. I'll let him know about it. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so when you think about getting out of the business school and then working for different types of companies, right? So you work for IBM and then some startups, and how do you think, if you can sum that up, that the experience from working in a large organization versus a small organization where you're probably, best friends, or on a day-to-day you interact with the executive team, whereas if you're in a large organization you're number 5,000 something. How What are the learnings from these two very different environments? Where did you learn more? How did you learn differently?
Well, I think everybody should go work for a big company if they have opportunity. I think everybody should go work for a small company. They're not for everybody, right? I think both environments and culture. At my job, we talk a lot about company culture because Spotlight, it's one of the things we try and help solve for. You just got to figure out what you want to do. So I would say, this might be skipping ahead a couple questions, but like if you're in your 20s and you're at Pepperdine right now, like your 20s are your time to just try a bunch of different things. It's like you don't. I feel so bad for the generations today with all the social media stuff. There's pressure, like you always feel behind, and that's not the case. Like your 20s are your years where you're just trying a bunch of stuff and meet a ton of people, right? So big company, go network with a ton of people. They're going to go to other places they can take you with you. Small company, same thing. Like the same principles apply. Your 30s, you kind of zero in on what you think you want to do, I think. And then you still have your time later on to really zero in if you want to. So listen, there's differences. Things move slower at bigger companies, but that's good for some people and frustrating for others. I think you just got to figure out who you are, and it's all about fit, right? It is all about fit, and like start to figure out, try and find those leaders and go work for them. And if you don't have a great boss, like go find a mentor that wants to develop you, because when you're working in those environments where there's high trust and they really care about like you as a person, they're trying to do that, amazing things can happen. When you're working for somebody or a bad culture where there's not trust, et cetera, it takes up your whole calories of your brain, and it just every day is really tough. So I can't say anything good or bad about either. I think it's more about fit for what environment you work well in, but I think you don't know if you don't try. So go try both and see what happens.
Great. Yeah. And so speaking of leadership, and you're working obviously in an environment with HR, so you have clients who are executives. What do you hear from them in terms of what they're looking for? Is there this notion of the ideal employee, if there's such a thing, or what do you think are some of the characteristics or the skill sets that executives are looking for now?
Yeah, so I've spent, ever since I left Pepperdine, I've been in the HR technology industry. So have gotten to know a lot of heads of recruiting, heads of talent management, heads of learning, CHROs, chief people officers, et cetera. Some of them become dear friends. I'm not sure what they're looking for has really changed, but I do know that there is a tremendous amount of emphasis the past few years on soft skills, right? So things like, how do you present yourself? How do you communicate? How do you collaborate versus like really in-depth type things. And so there's been a big push for companies to retrain their employees on soft skills, because it's something there's a lot of research that's been done that shows like the best performing employees are really amazing at some of these soft skills, right? And like they'll go and inventory the skills of their top leaders at their company, and they'll find out that, yeah, like they're really strong with this. So I think that's a lot. I'm a little bit old school here. I just think how you show up at work, how you present yourself, like, do you ask intelligent questions? Do you listen more than you talk, right? Do you show up a little bit early to meetings? Those things just go a long way. It just shows that you care, that you kind of give a crap about what you're doing. So, generally speaking, I think what's going on in the world of like talent and HR right now is there's a lot of uncertainty. So the HR as a profession is burned out. They're really our first responders of the workforce. When you think about it, I don't want to say they're as burned out as teachers and healthcare workers, but if you think about what they've gone through, just from COVID to return to work, and then some of the social issues like Roe versus Wade, now employees expect their companies to have strong points of view and stances on these things. And in the past, they weren't really forced to. And HR has kind of shouldered a lot of that burden. And some of them are burning out and they're leaving just because they can't take it anymore. So I would maybe say, listen, if you're in school right now and you're getting ready to do your job search for the spring or the internships or whatever, I would just say have a little bit of heart, because these HR folks have been through a tough few years here. And just listen, it's competitive, but then a huge advantage that everybody has today that maybe Clemens, you and I didn't have, is everything's so interconnected now. So it's like there's so much information now about what the company does. Like you used to have to go to the library and try and find like an annual report, or go search through like newspaper articles. Now everything's there. So like there's really no excuse for you to show up to an interview. You should be super well read on the company, super well read on the latest trends. The jobs are all posted now, right? And they specifically say what they're looking for. So I think just doing the research, because it's already there, that's their expectation. If you show up and you're not prepared, like, well, there's so much stuff here for you. If you're not going to take the time to know about the company and the job and have questions to ask, intelligent questions, you're just going to get passed up for the next person. And I don't think that's going to be a problem for really anybody on this call. I mean, you have a certain level of motivation if you're willing to go to graduate school, right? So
Sure.
Just little reminders. I think it's more the little things that really matter.
Yeah. So kind of the stuff you learn in kindergarten is actually very, very useful, right?
Yes.
And I always tell my kids, that's what you should do in life, in business. That's the basics. And if you can do that, you're up on most other people, because the average doesn't do that.
We're all humans too. Yeah. Like just treat people like how you want to be treated in a human. And I don't know, it'll go a long way.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And so you talked about the interview, but a lot of students that I hear from, they say they find it so challenging actually getting an interview. And so they say, Clemens, I sent out 50 resumes and I didn't hear anything back. And so, because you're at that really intersection of HR and technology, maybe you can talk a little bit about the return on your investment on sending 100 resumes as a cold call, so to speak. What is that? Is it still effective, or is there a better way to do that?
This is a hot debate because technology is not everything. It's got its pros and cons. I think one of the maybe cons could be that technology has been applied to the recruiting process. So now they're amazing at taking in resumes, like applying for jobs. But now that it's so easy to do that with like a couple of clicks, the stack is really big, right? So your competition is huge. I never really, all the jobs that I've ended up having have been through not applying. I'm fortunate. I know I'm fortunate, but like it's been through networking and finding. If I knew I wanted to go work somewhere, I found a way to get to somebody, and that's a huge benefit of LinkedIn now. It's like you can if you through a little bit of research, you can figure out who the managers are for hiring for these jobs just by searching around a little bit on that, right? And so we're just asking the question. So I think I'm still always surprised by that. Like I don't, we're a tiny company. We're just under 10 employees, but like other jobs that I've had were bigger teams. I'm always surprised that more people just don't find their way to my inbox, versus going through recruiters. I would just say, figure out who's owning the job. It's not the recruiters that own the job. The recruiters are hired by the company to find talent, but they're not the ones that you're going to be working with. So find out who's like on that team. If you can't get to the manager, who's on that team, who's got the same job title, go throw that into LinkedIn, reach out to them, ask them how that job's going. Hey, I applied. I'm probably stuck in the recruiting system, but tell me about do an informational interview with people that have the same title. Like I don't think a lot of people do that. I think there could be a real easy way for you to separate yourself from everybody else that's out there versus just applying and not getting any responses back.
Right. And maybe you can talk a little bit about grid and your sense of what the long game is actually involved in terms of your career. This is not just a transactional thing, it's actually it's an ongoing journey. And with that comes ongoing lifelong learning in some sense. So what is your advice in terms of, when you get discouraged, you don't get that first job, or the first job isn't really exactly the right way. Is there kind of an attitude or a strategy to say, hey, I'm on my path and I'm looking at the long game here? How do you view that?
I think this is probably the best advice I can give today on this whole thing. Is I remember exactly the feeling of, from literally the day, I think, because I knew the clock was ticking with 12 months from the day I stepped on campus, and I knew like I need to have a job after this thing because I've kind of zeroed out all of my bank account, right? And I took out loans, so like there was pressure and so I knew like from day one, it's like, all right, come August of next year, like I need a job, and I don't need a job. Like I want a good job, right? I want to get I want to get my bump in salary because I've got the MBA. And is that really true or not? I don't know. It's an unknown. I had pressure on myself. And if I had to go back now, I wouldn't put as much pressure on myself. I think you're investing in your MBA, not for that first job out. Like the first job could be a means to another place, which could be a means to another place, which could be a means to where you end up where you're really home and you're leveraging your strengths. So I would totally play the long game here. I know it's hard, but I'd play the long game of, I'm here for a reason. Let me make the most of it while it's here. Let me learn as much as I can. Let me network like crazy, because the networking, you're gonna leverage that down the road, right? I've run into people in my class, and I was only there for 12 months. I've run into people in my class further down my career that like popped up out of nowhere. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're working together. This is amazing. Mm-hmm. So I would totally play the long game. I wouldn't put pressure on. The job that you get after school is not going to be the one that defines you. It just won't. And yeah, just play the super long game and be patient, and just, but you got to know what you want to do coming out of school, because going back to your question, like what's HR looking for, or hiring managers, they want people that know. they want people that have conviction, they have passion. And so sometimes you kind of guess what, like, you got to kind of act like, hey, man, this is definitely what I want to do. Might not be, might not know, but it's like, as a hiring manager, I will tell you, like, I want somebody on my team that like believes in what we're doing and has almost feels compelled that they have to come here because of what we're doing. Like, that's what you want on your team. So I would just play the long game. I would be super patient and just enjoy the moment while you're there, because when it's done, it's done. And if you didn't take advantage of the resources and the opportunities that were there, man, it's a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, so true. And speaking of networking, so there's perhaps a misconception among, and I hate to sound like an old guy here, among some of the younger folks, that networking means you're having 1,000 followers on LinkedIn or on YouTube or in
Snapchat.
Snapchat, or whatever social media your favorite is. But networking is really something different. And for us that are a little bit older, we did networking with a telephone call, and that seems to be out of fashion these days. So can you speak a little bit, maybe some tips or advice of what not to do in thinking you're thinking you're networking, but you're actually not?
Yeah. Well, listen, social media has its pros and cons. I think one of the pros is that it affords an opportunity to connect on a totally different medium. And so if you're gifted enough to know how to use social media the right way, you can start following companies, right? I mean, companies a couple of years ago were like, should we have a TikTok page or now? And now most of them all do. So it's like going back to like the idea of like, there's so much information available for you. You can follow them on TikTok, you can follow them on Snapchat, you can follow them on LinkedIn, you can follow them on Facebook, Instagram. You get an idea of what's going on. So yeah, I think social media can be a huge piece of networking, but it can't. I think the point you're trying to make is it doesn't stop there. Just because you have followers, you're following things, doesn't mean that that's where it's at, right? And so, yeah, I think a way that I would define networking. There was a book that was kind of popular when I was in school. It was by Keith Ferrazzi, called Never Eat Alone. And I mean, the premise is, don't ever eat alone. Like table for one, you never know. Like you can sit here and meet somebody that you didn't even know. Like, so I've been on many a business trip where I am a table for one, but I'll go sit at like a cool restaurant, but at the bar, because sometimes you meet somebody that's like, they can help you out and like a business card gets exchanged, right? Sometimes the opportunity isn't there. It's always nerve-wracking, even now, to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation where you don't know somebody. But I probably will write some sort of book or something someday on this topic, because like my career has been shaped by those moments where I wanted to get on the plane and go home early, or I wasn't going to go to this dinner at a conference. And the people that I've met, one of the investors in our company right now, I met him because I stayed an extra night at a conference, didn't go home, and we had dinner together, became really good friends, So I think networking at its core is putting yourself in an uncomfortable position, maybe in a room, maybe at a dinner table, maybe at a restaurant bar, where you strike up a conversation and you never know what's going to happen. I think that's kind of the fun part. Like looking back, it's like, wow, why didn't I do that more? Right. So that's more the social aspect, not of like the overall networking. I think you have to be really good at it. If Pepperdine's putting together events where companies are coming, or you got opportunity to network with alumni, same principle. Might not be something you really want to do. You might want to go home and watch Netflix. You might want to go work out. You might want to go hang out with your friends, but like, spending a little bit extra time doing some networking, putting yourself in an uncomfortable position, can produce life-changing results.
That's great. Thank you. And then, pivoting a little bit differently here. So your company is kind of the intersection of tech and HR. Can you tell the students a little bit about what SpotLife is doing and how you guys are different, what your focus is?
Yeah. So what we did when we started the company, we just interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So these were CEOs, chief people officers, but this is last year. A lot of people were posting on LinkedIn, and maybe some people here on this call were like this, where maybe they ended up at Pepperdine because they had to leave their job. These are people posting on LinkedIn like, I quit my job today. I've got nothing to run to, but I can't take it anymore. Either they didn't like the culture, they didn't like the manager, they didn't identify with the CEO or trust the CEO. And they got so fed up and they were in such a bad fit for a job. They just said, I can't take it anymore. I quit. I'm done. And they quit their job, and then they go to LinkedIn because they're like, holy cow, I just quit my job. I can't believe I did that. I better do something. So they go on LinkedIn and they tell the story, and they're sitting there with like a couple hundred comments of people like, I'm in the same position. Like, thank you for saying that. I'm so nervous to quit my job, all this. And so those conversations were fascinating. What to distill a lot of research down to something really fast is people just want permission to have a life with their manager and their work. They just, and it's a fact, like we have our life ebbs and flows daily, weekly, monthly, right? Our own self-care ebbs and flows and our work ebbs and flows. But traditionally in the workplace, it's taboo to talk about anything other than work. But the world's best managers just do this innately. They ask their people, how's it going? What's going on outside of work? Is there anything I can do to help you? And they ask, just by asking those questions and being empathetic, it creates trust. It speeds up trust like crazy and creates amazing. It ultimately leads to more engaged employees, which leads to performance. And so we felt there's an opportunity to build a software app for the workplace where companies buy for their people that help people think about that harmony of work, life, and self-care. So we define work self-explanatory, that's work and career. Life is friends, social, family, relationships, that kind of thing. And self-care is what we always deprioritize. We just put ourselves last, work and everything else, and then we're last. So self-care is physical wellness, mental wellness, spiritual wellness, financial wellness, your hobbies. So every Monday morning, if you're a Spotlight user at a company, you'll answer a question: how fulfilled are you at work? 0 to 100. How fulfilled are you in your life? 0 to 100. How fulfilled are you with your own self-care? So it's kind of a check yourself moment. And that data is all yours. It's all private. If you choose to share it with your boss or somebody at your company, you can, but it's all yours. And so, we're trying to blaze a new trail. We're trying to create workplace cultures that are more people first. Some companies already do this, right? They just do it innately, but a lot of companies need help. And so we're going right to the CEOs and saying, hey, listen, through all the research that's out there, a more engaged employee stays longer, is more productive. The fastest way to get them engaged is to know them for who they are and treat them like a human. So I would just say, think about anybody on this call, think about times where you might have left a job and you just couldn't take it anymore, or think about if you were a manager and somebody quit, you don't really know why. They probably didn't know. They didn't have this like check engine light that comes on, or an early warning signal that shows them they might be burning out before I actually do. And that's what we're trying to prevent, is we're trying to prevent burnout and voluntary attrition.
Great. So in terms of your research, if you have done that particular angle, do you see that some of the people who are disenfranchised or they're just fed up, to some extent, is it what the company does? Does the company have an impact policy? So, to make a simple story, if you're a weapons manufacturer, it probably doesn't feel good working for that company just, because of what they produce and what the impact is. Or if you're an oil producer, you may have an issue with the pollution element, talking about global warming. So in your research, to what extent was, this kind of unhappiness and I can't take it anymore associated with what the company actually does, what their impact is on society?
Most of what we did in our conversations ended up that it was a really bad manager situation. The manager wasn't hearing the person or seeing the person. The person felt like they had been raising their hands for help. Sometimes you're just overwhelmed and you just can't get to everything. That's the majority of it. I think, listen, if you're going to go work for those types of companies, you better be passionate about what they do. I mean, a company's paying you money to go do a job, right? So if you're applying for that job, I would ask you before you apply, like, are you go read the mission, go read the vision. Are you behind that? Because it's not real. I don't know if it's really okay to go work for a company that might be doing those things and that just you identify differently with that. Like, go find something else, right? Because the company's not changing. You're the one that can change. And sometimes it's hard to make that leap to go do the change. But I think we've got a lot of advisors with our company that have kind of helped us, and a couple of them are writing books on like fit in jobs and what happens like when you have great fit and what happens when you don't have great fit, right? Others are writing books on like how to treat people better, just in general, treat them like humans, and what could happen if we do that. So, I think it comes down to, do you have the right skills for the job? If you don't, are you willing to learn those skills? And do you have a manager supporting you for that? if you're working for a company that's producing a product that you don't socially identify with, why are you spinning your wheels? Why are you wasting your time, right? Go do something else that fires you up. Life's too short, right? So I think I just was watching Gary Vaynerchuk on Instagram the other night, and he does a great job. Like, he's very interactive on social, and he'll interview somebody, and he just encourages people on stage all the time to go, like, listen, like, go find the one, like, what are the one or two or three things that you're just passionate about in life, right? It could be drinking wine, it could be sports, it could be working out. And it's like, go do something that ties to whatever you're personally wired and passionate about, because that's going to produce an environment that you're going to be way better in versus going to work somewhere that hey, the pay's pretty good, they got good benefits, but I don't know if I really identify with the mission. Like, you're just kind of, presenting a lot of unnecessary friction there. And I know some people aren't fortunate enough to be able to switch that easy, and I understand that, but that's where it comes back to the long game, which is zero in on something you're really passionate about, try and find a way to do that and build a career around it.
All right. And we talked about work-life balance. So if you don't mind, how do you achieve that personally in your life? Because obviously starting a new company, you're not working 9 to 5. You're working upwards of 70, 80 hours, probably, is my guess. If not, then you must be better at, maximizing your time off. But how do you achieve that?
Listen, I think I worked for those startups where you go work 60, 80 hours. And I think what's happened over the past 25 years is people have realized, like, that's not good. I mean, there is science that is out there. If anybody's interested, we just did this webinar yesterday on burnout in the workplace, and you can go follow Spotlight on social media. If you scroll on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll find it. We published a research paper called Burning Out, and we started out doing research, and we realized, like, holy crap, there's already research that exists. And one piece we found was, when you consistently prioritize work over life, and you do this consistently, you're taking time off the back end of your life. It's scientifically proven, like, you're killing yourself when you're doing that. Europeans do a really good job at this, right? They don't identify whatever their work is with what their life is. In America, we don't do the best job at this. And so I just so happened to go work for a company that really promotes, through the product, promotes balance and harmony across work life and self-care. So, if you're not taking care of yourself first, physically and mentally, and you're not taking care of your life, which could be your friends, your family, your kids, or whatever, you don't have a chance to be great at work. So no, I don't work that much. And we don't, and we're producing amazing results. We have unlimited PTO. I'm very generous with when we also give holidays out, right? We did a summer break this summer. We're doing the whole week of Thanksgiving off. I know that my people, when they're recharged on what matters to them, and it's up to them what matters, right? It could be family, could be hobbies, whatever. When they're rested and recharged, they're gonna be great at work. And we produced an amazing amount of results in a little over a year. And I believe that's because it's not about the hours or the face time. It's about the fit in the role and coaching somebody as a human to get that max performance out of them. So, so anyway, what do I do for that? Like, unfortunately, like, Spotlight is now just ingrained in my brain, where every day I'm thinking about those rings of work, life, and self-care, and how fulfilled am I, and are they up, are they down? And if they're down, what do I do, right? Usually it comes back to, if I'm down, I'm not taking the time to do some exercise. Just getting outside. Fortunately, now that I live in the Carolinas, like, you can get outside every day. In Chicago, you couldn't do that. So I'm out trying to get vitamin D. I'm out walking my dog, doing some runs when I can, playing golf, right? Like, I want to be outside because that kind of recharges the body. And then I try and take time for myself, just to do some quiet time thinking, right? Reading, relaxing. When I do go outside, I actually try and take these out. I know it's like, I love music. I'm a huge music fan, but like, if you take them out, you can kind of listen to nature. We got this really cool forest preserve across the street from us. I'll go over there, and it's usually quiet, and you can just like sit down and just listen to like all the noises. So I do that. I spend a lot of time. I've got 3 girls, so spend a lot of time with them. And those are the things that kind of, friends, family, personal self-care, that's what recharges me, because work is demanding. I mean, starting a company is not easy. It's a constant grind. One of my fellow entrepreneur friends says sometimes it feels like you're eating glass, and some days it definitely does. But you don't get anywhere if you don't eat a little glass for a while.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and speaking of that time off, do you have any tips or recommendations on how students can kind of manage that? Because we're always so inundated. So taking time off, you know, still this stuff shows up, right?
Yeah.
Your cell phone is with you most of the time. And that means you're constantly, there's always noise. There's always something that follows you. And how do you switch that off? So speaking of the Europeans in some companies, their email service shuts off at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So even if you wanted to check emails, it doesn't work, right? You wait until the next morning. But do you have any sort of recommendations, or do you have a practice or some sort of algorithmic method that you can schedule your work for a certain period and then you switch off and do just your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's some tips in that research paper too. There's a bunch of free stuff in there. You should go check it out. I think so. Yes, the phone is. Unfortunately, I think it's more of a problem than it's a benefit when you really think about like your overall wellness. And so little things like not bringing your phone in the bedroom, and unfortunately, sometimes I violate that. Right. When I go on vacation, this started probably 5 or 6 years ago. I used to check my email the entire time I was on vacation, and I would like respond. And man, what a mistake. I just missed out on amazing vacation time, because I was, I mean, you have a little bit of an ego, but you're like, oh, I don't know, like I can keep things moving. So let me keep it moving while I'm gone. So, but you're not that important. You really aren't, right? And you learn that when you leave companies. Wow, everything kept going after I left. It always happens, right? They find a way to do that. So I think the way to balance that, Apple's done a pretty nice job on their phone. I don't have an Android, but like you can now set those quiet times. I just try and leave my phone, like after I get up from my desk, I just leave my phone at my desk. Sometimes I'm not great at that, but you just do that. It's kind of funny. It's like you create, by being on it, you're creating part of the problem, because if you respond to something that's going out to other people and it's back and forth, back and forth. So I actually think America might catch up to Europe. It might take us a little bit longer, but I'm telling you, everybody we talk to about Spot Life and all the burnout stuff, everyone's like, yeah, we got to put a stop to this. This is not healthy. And that's why I want to shine lights on some of those like research that already exists, that's been around for like 4 decades around like prioritizing work over life. You're killing yourself. So yeah, I think making time, making boundaries, starting to become more self-aware about yourself around when do you do your best work. I had a coach talk to me about this one time. I was like, no, seriously, like think about like what time of day do you do your best work? And do your hardest work then, right? Or do like in the morning when you're fresh, like get all that stuff off your plate, because like in this role I'm in, I'm on Zoom a lot, right? And by the time the end of the day comes, my brain just is fried. And so I can't get off 8 Zooms and then like sit down and try and do some work. It just doesn't happen. So becoming self-aware about who you are. And we're also kind of transitioning to this world of work where it's not 8 to 5 anymore, right? Some companies are really progressive with this. So they'll allow them to, it's okay. Like it comes back to conversation. At one point when you got young kids, it's like, hey, it's not really good for me to be working during these hours, but I will tell you where I'm great, like these other hours. So just communicating with your coworkers or your bosses about, when's a good time and when's not. Hopefully you work for a boss and a culture where that's supportive. I think rest is so important. If you're going to go do a vacation, like go put the career placement on hold a little bit, right? Like go take your time and relax. And if you don't want to do that for the full time, just pick a day or two, like start somewhere and just find your me time. You find your me time and recharge, everything else works out good.
Great. So another thing that comes to mind when we talk about, not answering emails on vacation, that means you have to have a level of trust with your team, with your coworkers, that they can actually get that work done. So it's a combination of trust in your fellow employees or your coworkers, and then also this sense of delegating, right? And so at the same time, I was reading the earnings transcript from Tesla earlier today, and I literally looked at the words. Actually, downloaded it, did a word count, and Elon Musk did more than 50% of the words in that conference call. Mm-hmm. And many of the questions were related to the CFO, right? But he is the typical micromanager, right? In many ways. Not healthy. He seems to be able to pull this off with great success. I don't know if there's a long end of the story that looks differently, but a lot of young, especially young guys, look up to this guy and say, hey, he can pull this off. And he works 96 hours a week and he's very successful. Why can't I do that? And why shouldn't I do that? So that brings me back to when my kids were younger, they watched the Lego movie, and there was the literal micromanager part of that Lego movie.
Yeah, right.
And you know, obviously not very successful in his job, right? But how would you go about creating teams or working in companies where that level of trust is there, so you can take off for a week or for a few days and not have to check your email 24/7, building that level of trust so that you can actually delegate responsibility to somebody else?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
so first of all, no, it's great. It's very relevant. So I think a couple things, like on taking vacation, like planning for your vacation, right? So like being able to talk to your team members about what might be happening while I'm gone, or what do I need you to help me with while I'm gone? Because if you take your time off, and let's say you do totally unplug, right? You don't check anything, but you come back and the mountain of work is so big, it's not vacation. It's just deferred work time. And we're now, like, that was so taboo a few years ago. Now people are talking about that, where it's like, I'm not coming back to 10,000 emails. Well, I'm not going to go through them. So like people will put on their out of office, I'm literally gone. And the chances of me reading this email when I come back are really slim. So like, it's all about expectation setting, right? So if you set that expectation, it's like you put the onus back on the person sending the email, like, oh yeah, Josh is gone this week. All right, I'll resend this to him when he gets back, right? Or maybe it's not that important. So it's like little things like you're out of office, little things like you're planning before you go out on what might actually happen or what could happen, and making sure there's coverage. Just little things like that can allow you to relax. But yeah, there's a lot of good blog posts about, like, is it really vacation if you come back and you're even more buried from when you left, right? So that comes down to planning. For Elon, listen, I mean, you can't really argue with his success over the years, right? I mean, what he's done as an entrepreneur, wow, right? I mean, between Tesla and SpaceX and all the way back. So, and it's also his company, so he can kind of manage it however you want. I'm not saying micromanagement is good. It's kind of been proven that it's not good, but who am I to tell Elon Musk that he's running his businesses wrong? Like, he's created more market value than almost anybody that's out there. So I think it comes back to you. Do you want to go work in that environment? Do you want to go thrive in an environment? And how does that make you feel? If the micromanagement makes you feel like you don't care about it, and you thrive in that because maybe you really need that guidance from above or that oversight from above, then maybe you're working in a job that's a great fit for you, and then you're thriving, and that's okay. But if you don't thrive in that environment and that drives you nuts, man, like, that's not going to work for you. So, right. So I think that's really interesting to look at. But, you know, everybody's got their own companies. They can run them however they want because it's their company, right? Sure. Unless you're accountable to shareholders, and he is. But can I lose you?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, good. Okay, I don't know where you went. There we are. We're back.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it comes down to your fit, and people can run companies how they want, but then they run the risks of, you know, people come, people leave, and see what happens.
All right, good. So in the interest of time, let's see if the students have any questions. So I'm reaching out to all you guys that are on the call. Please type your questions in the chat. I don't think I saw any, but I could be wrong.
I see some in the Q&A box, Clemens. So
okay, maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing here.
Yeah, there's a
oh yeah,
a couple down.
Now I see it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I got the wrong thing open here. So let's start in the top here. Josh, my connection was cutting in and out. Could you repeat? Oh, we don't need to do that.
I don't remember saying anything. It says, could you repeat what you said about the Porsche experience? And I don't remember saying that.
We have a recording for whoever typed that message. We have a recording, so you can relook at that recording and get that. So, question, at what point in your illustrious and successful career, how did you know when you're ready to start your own business or your own company? What was the required skill and mindset to be able to start and run a successful business? How do you know when you're even ready? Lots of good questions here.
It's a good one.
Lots of them.
I remember saying a lot over my career, I don't want to be a CEO. I remember saying that a lot because I watched a lot of founders, I watched a lot of CEOs, and I watched how stressed they were. Because when you work for startups and venture-backed companies, the board, I'd be in these board meetings, and the board meetings are tough. They're tough. I mean, these companies are putting tens of millions of dollars into your business. They expect results, and that's no different if you're public too, right? You've got investors you got to answer to, and I just remember watching them like, I don't think that's for me. And something just kind of clicked. I did get a call from one of the founders and CEOs of HireVue, Mark Newman, and he called me and he's like, I think it's time for you to be a CEO. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'll back you. He's like, what ideas do you have? And we had the idea of Spotlight. We weren't quite sure what it was going to be, but directionally we knew. And there were a couple of us that were talking about it. I had a couple other investors that we were working with, kind of like, what if we could do this and what if we could do that, and kind of brought Mark into the mix. So he gave me the confidence I needed to do it. But I will tell you, there's a lot of days where you're like, am I really doing this? Am I really, but I also have felt that feeling in other jobs that I've been in, right? Where we've got our own imposter syndrome, where we don't think we're ever good enough to do something. And so I think that's where open communication just works. I tell my team all the time, like, listen, I've worked hard in my career. I've done a lot of different jobs. I've never founded a company before. Have I led teams? Absolutely. Have I been a part of startups and growth companies? Absolutely. But sometimes you see something you don't know, and that's when you go out and ask your team. Like, that's why you hire people. And that's why you trust your team members. It's like, I tell my team all this all the time. I don't have all the answers. I want us to come up with the answers. I'll have strong points of view, but that doesn't mean I have the answer, right? So I don't know if you're ever ready. It's a daunting task. A lot of things personally, you have to take into account depending on where you're at with your own job, your career, your home life. But I think to me, it comes back to the passion, because there are a lot of dark days. There's a lot of days where you do kind of eat that quote unquote glass. It's tough. And so if you don't really, really believe in what you're doing, I think it's really easy to lose confidence. And so the other thing I always think about is, at least we're trying something. Every startup I've been at, it's like, hey, we're trying something. It might not work. And most startups, there's a lot of stats, like 99.99% of startups fail, and that's true. So, but at least we're trying to advance the world in a certain way. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? There's a plan out there, and maybe this wasn't the plan. So, but I sleep pretty good knowing that I'm trying something. I'm setting an example for my kids that, hey, listen, you got to take risks in life, and there's different times to do it. And for me, this is a time to take a huge risk, and we'll see what happens.
Great. So the next
question.
And
the one thing I'll just add, there's people that want to see you succeed. Find out who those are. Like, go get your own personal board of directors. Do that now. You don't need to start a business to do that now. Like, sometimes they're in your company, sometimes they're out of it. Your true friends are the ones that are going to tell you the truth, right? And that's what you need when you're gonna take a big risk and jump in the deep end, and you're not really sure if you can swim or not. Like, you need people to be like, you'll be all right, man. You can do it. So get a personal board of directors as soon as possible. Tell them they're on the board. Meet with them and tell them things you're struggling with. Like, people want to see other people succeed. Sometimes it's just taking the time to actually put that team together.
That's great. So the next question here says, Pepperdine University is a Christian university, obviously. How do Christian values, ethics, and principles inform your work at your firm?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're definitely a mission-driven, purpose-driven company. And we, a couple people in the company have some very strong faith. We talk openly about that, right? It's not for everybody, but we talk about that. But at our core of Spotlight, I do think there's a lot of Christian values, which is, first of all, as a company, and what we're trying to do in the product is we're trying to just treat people like humans, right? Like, treat people well, treat people how you want to be treated. Like that's the messaging to the managers that are out there, right? It's like, just treat them, like just ask them questions, just treat them like humans, and good things can happen. And I think on the product side, just being able to think intelligently and intentionally. There's a whole feature we have internally on the product called intentions, which is, what do I want to do this week? It's not a goal, it's not an OKR. It's like, what's one small micro change I want to intend to try. So we're trying to make people a little bit better week over week. And I just think there's great principles there as well, like just constant improvement and just trying to be a little bit better and support people in that journey. Ethics. I remember when I was in Malibu, a lot of classes talked ethics. At the time was a big deal, right? Because we were kind of coming off the earlier years of some very unethical companies, right? Between Enron and many others that were making really shady business decisions. The investors didn't know about it. So I remember, I actually think that was a theme while I was there in all the classes, probably at the head dean level, like, we got to drive ethics into these folks because they're going to go out in the workforce, and if they don't have an ethical background. So that was driven hard and instilled in me, right? So I always think about that. You're never perfect, but you try and always think about the other person first. I learned this before I went to Pepperdine, but the whole Wall Street Journal test, which is, if something shows up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, would you be okay with that decision? And that's always like a really good test, right? Because sometimes you find yourself in like, people tell you something confidentially, hearing conversations. It's tough to navigate those waters, but I think just trying to act with ethics the best that you can. Thinking about, like, if you do make a decision, sometimes you're going to make hard decisions, who's going to be affected by that, and maybe try and be in their shoes and think about, like, how they might feel. I've been laid off before, I've been fired before. I've had to do that. It's not fun, so always ethically thinking about doing it the right way, passing feedback the right way, and how you felt in those situations to try and communicate effectively. So hopefully that answered the question.
Great, thank you. And then from Karen Weiss, a very good question here. Now that you're CEO, what are the top two or three things you hope your team will say about you? And if asked, what type of leader are you? And she says, hi, Josh, by the way.
Oh, Karen, hello. I have Karen to thank for being on this. She's asked me to be on this, and we were trying to always come to Malibu, and I just could never make the travel work just because I was rarely there. But now we're in Zoom, and this is awesome. So thank you. Karen was a bright light when I was in school. She always was super helpful, helping me think. She knew how nervous I was about getting a job when I came out, so she was always a great coach. What are the top two or three things you hope your team will say about you if asked what type of leader you are? I hope they say that I'm a really good listener. I try to do my best there, right? We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Sometimes my mouth can get the best of me, but I hopefully try and do that, and hopefully that I have their best interests in mind. I do think about that a lot. As a person, I just kind of tend to, I just feel other people's feelings a lot, and so that sometimes gets hard to navigate when you've got to deliver really hard feedback or you've got bad news. It's like, man, it really weighs on you. So anyway, hopefully high empathy listener, and someone that doesn't take themselves too seriously, somebody that has some fun along the way, because I work for some people that are great like that, and I work some others that are just all business all the time, and that's tough. Life's short, and for the most part, like when you're working for a company, this is kind of a general statement, but I feel like for the most part, you're not doing heart surgery, right? There's people that are literally saving lives. Like I'm helping people prevent burnout. Other places I've worked, I'm not sure we're really saving lives, but sometimes people treat it like it's do or die, and it really isn't. And so I try and bring like that levity back when, like, sometimes we're going to important things, and yeah, it matters. And other times it's like, man, we might be over-rotating, overreacting a little bit. Like, let's slow down, and that's why it kind of going back into like time off and vacation, it makes it kind of easy. If a leader can say, guys, listen, let's take the whole week of Thanksgiving off. Let's do it. Like, let's really recharge with our family. I know I'm lucky to be able to say that because we're only 10 people, but is what we're doing like really, really that important where we got to be on 24/7? Sometimes you are. Sometimes you're in a job where it's mission critical. But so hopefully the third piece is just trying to not take myself too seriously and have some fun along the way.
All right. I think that's a pretty good point to end our conversation. Do you have any final comments or suggestions, or maybe a question to the students that they can chew on for the weekend or for the rest of their career?
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully they don't chew much on the weekend. Like, go relax on. I'm sorry, I'm kidding with you, Clemens, but like we're always about balance here at Spotlight.
Yeah.
No, I think one thing I'll just say up front, I know how I was when I was listening to these, and like you always want to like try and hopefully get a job out of these, but I don't really have anything I can offer at this stage, like open job wise. So I can't really help too much on that, and I'm kind of bummed about that. I wish I was coming in and I was working at Disney, and I'm like, yeah, here's our summer internship program, and here's all these open jobs that we have. I just don't have that. So I'd rather just offer up advice, which is, I think, just spend time figuring out who you are, right? Like, who are you, and try and understand that and be able to communicate that in a way, because the interview process for jobs, you're trying your best to kind of date a little bit to see like what life's going to be like when we start working together, but it's really, really hard. And sometimes, we've been here where we've hired people who are like, we thought it was going to be great, it just doesn't work out. You don't really know anybody. So I think you knowing who you are and being able to communicate that in a way is only going to help you, right? Like, you want to put your best foot forward in your interviewing, but it's like, you also want them to know who you are and what you stand for, and like assessing fit, right? You don't want to get into a culture that's not a good fit for you. So I think trying to figure that out, like who you are, what your passions are, and try and center the job and the career around that. I cannot underscore the networking stuff enough. It is produced inside work and outside of work, amazing relationships for me that are totally life-changing. So as hard as that is, I know sometimes we get international students that come in and they might be uncomfortable speaking English. Like, I'm sure that's got to be intimidating, but I've always found when I go abroad and I try my best to speak a couple sentences of the language, everyone's so welcoming. So, put yourself in those uncomfortable positions and network like crazy. And I would say, while you're there, I wish I could go back. I really do. I miss it. And there were times where I felt like I was in the moment, but other times I really wasn't. I was more worried about getting the job or the commute back to the South Bay, which was really long. I drove every day. So I would just say, if you're in class, like, it might be a natural instinct to like dread the class, but like, they're teaching you things that like you're going to need to know. Even if you're not a finance person and you find yourself in like a capital markets class, like, you're going to kind of need to know that stuff at some point. So even there's a reason why the course is on the curriculum, and take the most out that you can, meet people, network like crazy, and have fun.
Thank you so much, Josh. And here's an open invitation. Anytime you're in the LA area, come and visit us.
Yeah, I need to.
Anytime.
I need to. Karen's probably laughing right now because she's only asked me like probably 5 or 6 times. So yeah, I need to make it a priority. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to come back here. I've never done this before with Pepperdine, and there's a lot of people that shaped who I was there, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that. I know I'm leaving some names out here, but even like the first weekend, I remember my OD professor, Kent Rhodes, like we went out to, I don't know if you guys still do that, but we went out to that retreat up in the hills, those first couple of days, and you get around a circle and asking questions about like stuff that's super relevant. That goes back to those soft skills, right? Like organizational behavior and like what kind of happens, how do you communicate and deal with people and stuff. So that was a lot of fun and great people. So thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'll let Kent know, by the way. He's still with us, still teaching.
Is he? Great.
Still doing great work. So I'll let him know.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Hi. All right. Cheers, everybody. Have a good weekend.